Welcome to the Gray Path Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Tony B. Today, we are digging right into the next piece in our series regarding the flip side or the other side of famous villains or heroes. This is something I feel is really important to discuss because a lot of times it's really easy to get locked into these ideas of what is good and what is bad when in reality the world really does exist within the gray, and the name of this podcast is the Gray Path. So I really wanted to take the time to highlight this. Now, this has been a 10-week series. We are currently doing part 7. Today we're going to discuss the Jedi Order. Specifically, we're going to discuss the dark side of the Jedi Order. Now, after this week, there will only be 3 weeks left, and then we'll be going back to kind of the normal format of the show. But I've really enjoyed doing this series. I really hope everyone has enjoyed listening to it. And I think it's fun to take a break from some of the more heavier subject matter that we tackle on this show and kind of just look at popular figures, popular heroes, villains, and really kind of explore them from a side that other people wouldn't necessarily think about. So, again, today's episode, we're going to be focusing on the Jedi Order. Not any particular Jedi, but the Order as a whole. And we'll be kind of drawing from parts of the current canon as well as the Legends or the Expanded Universe, which, as everybody who has listened to the show knows, is my favorite part of Star Wars. So, the Jedi Order originally established on Octu. Now, that's the planet that was highlighted. If you are familiar with the films, hopefully you are. This is going to be kind of an in-depth discussion in Star Wars, so hopefully you're somewhat familiar. But Octu was shown in The Last Jedi, which was a very controversial film, surprisingly, for Star Wars. Now, that would be the second film in the most recent trilogy, starring Daisy Ridley, and Mark Hamill reprised his role as Luke Skywalker, so on and so forth. It was, in my opinion, one of the best Star Wars films they've put out, which I know is a very contentious opinion, but it's because they really went for it. I was not a very big fan of The Force Awakens because it was basically a remake of A New Hope, which was Episode 4. And the dumpster fire that was Rise of Skywalker, I just have no place for in my life. That was just it was just a terrible movie. It was terribly thought up. It was literally one director trying to undo everything that another director did. It was a hot, steaming pile of garbage. But The Last Jedi, on the other hand, I mean, it made some bold choices. It took a character of Snoke, who looks like he was building up to have some depth, and they suddenly killed him. And they took a real wooden character in Kylo Ren and really made him something more. But Octu is displayed in The Last Jedi. That is the planet that Luke Skywalker is found on by Rey, played by Daisy Ridley. And that's the island that is that infamous scene that everyone had such a big problem with, where you see at the end of The Force Awakens, you see you see Rey hand Luke his lightsaber, formerly his father's lightsaber, and he chucks it over the cliff in the next scene. There's a lot of people had a lot of issues with the movie. They felt that it was, it was really a hard steer in another direction for Star Wars, which they hated. And to those people, I say, I disagree. To those people, I say I actually think it was a bold choice. I think it was great that they went into the direction that they did. But this isn't an episode about the Last Jedi, although I probably should do one on it. This is an episode about the dark side of the Jedi Order. So the Jedi Order was established on Octu, which is in the unknown regions. And that's where where the first Jedi temple is held, as well as the quote unquote Jedi texts, the ancient texts. Now, later on, the Jedi are most known for having their headquarters on Coruscant, which was the Great Jedi Temple. And that is the temple that you see get sacked in the Revenge of the Sith, when Anakin marches in there with the 501st and just wipes the whole place out. So we all know where the Jedi are. And for those who don't know what a Jedi is, it's going to be a really difficult conversation to follow. But without getting too deep into it, they are the protagonists. They are the heroes, if you will, of the Star Wars universe. They are followers of the light side of the Force, and they believe in peace, harmony, and all of that. But there's so much more to what they are, so much more than what their PR says. So one of the things that the Jedi are known for doing, which is highly controversial, and in my opinion, kind of borders on immoral, is they are known for, and there's a couple different words you can say here. You can say recruiting, you can say kidnapping, you can say coercion, but they are known for taking babies, young beings from all over the galaxy who show force potential. And they get them when they're young and they bring them to the Jedi Temple and they see if they have what it takes to become a Jedi. Now, just being taken by the Jedi does not necessarily mean that you are going to be in the Jedi Order. There's still ranks and tiers and things that they have to go through in order to really get there. In order to actually be able to become a Jedi, you have to pass the initiate trials. Then, you go through and you do all your youngling training and your indoctrination, and then you become a Padawan. And then eventually, if you pass your Jedi Knight trials, you become a Jedi Knight. Excuse me. And then you can go and be promoted to a master. And then from a master, you can sit on the council, and then you can become a grand master if you are the best of the best. So it's a lot like the military mixed with like a cult. And how they get their new members is they go through and they take them. Now, it's not quite forceful taking. So the Empire was known for forced conscription. The First Order was known for abducting babies. That's how Finn, the character Finn, became a stormtrooper, was because he was abducted and indoctrinated by the First Order. The Jedi weren't so direct. They would discover force potentiality in people. We'll just say people because the Star Wars universe has such a wide variety of alien species, but they would find force potential in people or in babies. They would go to the, I guess you can say, parents. They would go to the guardians of said person, and then they would try to recruit them, take them, convince them that their life was better if they would join the order. It's a lot like kind of like a high school recruiter, kind of like the military recruiter you always see popping up in high school. Is talking to all the kids, hey, you want to see the world, you want to have a better life, join the military. In a lot of ways, that's what the Jedi did. But what made them even more scary, though, is they weren't just like a military force. The Jedi, I don't know if this is common knowledge, but the Jedi were not a militaristic order. They were not designed to be the flexing arm of the Republic. They were a monastic order, meaning they were monks. And yes, they were trained in defense and they had offensive capabilities, but they were a monastic order. They weren't a military. Yet they were coming in and they were taking babies, and they were doing this for a long time. And it's not as if they were taking babies because, oh, we just want more time with them. They were taking babies because they understood that it was easier to indoctrinate a baby than it was to try to teach a full grown person, or even a person who had already begun to develop opinions and viewpoints and characteristics and personality. And this is highlighted no better than the reflections between Anakin and Luke. So when Anakin is first presented to the Jedi Order, which happens in the Phantom Menace episode 1, the Jedi Order, they do exactly what they said they would. They sit down and they evaluate him, because Qui-Gon brings him in and says, hey, this kid could be this prophecy that we've all heard about. So they're like, okay, we'll test him and we'll see. And his force, like his innate force ability, tests off the scale. His midichlorian counts super high. He's got a lot of innate talent. But Yoda straight up says, we're not going to train him. He's too old. He's too full of fear. He has too many things to worry about, which is Yoda's way of saying he's not going to be able to prescribe to this code of conduct that we have set. And therefore, we don't want him. He's too old. It's going to be too hard to do it. When Luke finds Yoda, years and years later, when Luke's old enough, he finds Yoda on Dagobah, and he's led there by the ghost of Obi-Wan. And, Luke's this cocky, he's coming off of a victory that blew up the first Death Star. So he went from basically hick farmer boy to galaxy-wide hero, and he's kind of a little full of himself. He's got a couple tricks up his sleeve with the Force, and he thinks he knows what's up. And he finds, he goes to Dagobah, he's looking for this great warrior, and of course there's the whole lesson there where Yoda's like, oh, we're Wars not make you greater. I forget the exact quote, but the whole point being was Luke was cocky and cocksure, looking for someone he expected to be this big badass, not knowing this little old creature in front of him was the badass all along. And what does Yoda say to Obi-Wan's ghost? Can't train him. He's too old. Why is he too old? He's full of fear. He's got relationships. He's got people he cares about. He's got commitments he needs to adhere to. And Yoda and the Jedi, because basically Yoda's like a walking history of the Jedi at this point. He's been alive for 900 years. And he says, look, I can't do it. He's too old. He's got too much belief already ingrained in him. I can't brainwash him. That's what he basically comes down and says, because that's how the Order did it. They took younglings, or I'm sorry, they took babies, they indoctrinated them, they taught them to not form attachments, which we'll get into here in a second. That's problematic in and of itself, but they needed to do it when they were young. They needed to take babies before they formed that bond with their moms. And what happened with Anakin? Anakin couldn't let go, and he couldn't adhere to the Jedi teachings because Anakin still had some chips on his shoulder, and rightfully so. He was a fucking slave. He was a slave. And then all of a sudden he is meant to just let all that shit go. Like he's supposed to just let it go, not worry about it, and, hang out with these space monks. And on top of all of it, he was a slave, and his mom was left in slavery. His mom was left in slavery by the very people that he idolized. He knew who the Jedi were when he met Qui-Gon. He knew the legend of the Jedi, and he saw them as these saviors. And then Qui-Gon comes and says, oh, hey, I freed you, but we're not taking your mom. And that broke Anakin because he loved his mom. His mom was the only thing that he had. And it's true. He was too old. He was too old to prescribe to this harsh code that the Jedi adhered to and that they expected others to adhere to. And that this is, let's just look comparatively here. The Jedi want their followers when they're babies because they want to be able to brainwash them and prevent them from creating attachments. Where some of, if not the most powerful Sith, are people that came later on in life. They discovered the Sith tenets and they embraced the Sith code later on in life. It might be easy to say because the Sith rely so much on emotion that the Jedi are more complicated. They're more complex. I posit that it's the other way around. I actually think the Sith are more complex. The nature of Sith indoctrination is much more complex. Now, of course, anyone who's been a frequent listener of the show knows I'm not a huge fan of the Sith and I'm not a huge fan of the Jedi. To me, the power lies in the middle. But without digging into that aspect of it, you can't fault the fact that the dark side, the Sith, okay, you can take an adult person and indoctrinate them in the Sith ways, and they can become unquestionably powerful and adhere to those ways. But you can't take an older person and try to get them to prescribe to the light side of the Force. That just does not work. So what kind of order can call themselves the Guardians of the Galaxy and the peace and freedom when their entire structure is built upon abduction, built upon abducting these kids in order to brainwash them so that they'll follow their way of thinking? And all of that ties into the next point I want to make, which is the Jedi of old. So the Jedi Order, all the way leading up to Order 66, even the High Republic area. I've been listening to a lot of audiobooks based on the High Republic era of Star Wars history, which is just now being created. And again, the Jedi, even in that, they are, they're made to be these peace and loving guardians and this and that and the other thing, but they still carry with them this ego and this arrogance. I think one of the big problems the Jedi have run into is they have fallen in love with their own legend. They're not just good guys, if you will. They know the way they're seen in the galaxy. They know they're seen as saviors to the downtrodden. They are seen as villains to the oppressors. They know this, and it's like they've fallen in love with it, and they've become egotistical. Arguably one of the most powerful people of the Jedi Order was Grandmaster Yoda, and he was incredibly egotistical. He was so egotistical that he didn't see Palpatine right in front of his face. He had in-depth meetings with Palpatine and never once suspected him of being the Sith Lord. I mean, because Yoda was cocky. He knew his order's power, he knew his own abilities, and he fell in love with the legend that was the Jedi. They were completely blinded to the rot that was right in front of them. They knew the Senate was corrupted. Everybody in the galaxy knew that. It was a bloated political body that never got shit done and was rife with corruption. But he failed to even think. He failed to even notice. He failed to even suspect that the orchestrator of all this chaos was in front of him the entire time. Now, some may come back and say, oh, well, Palpatine was able to cloud the Force, so Yoda wasn't able to see enough or glean enough from the Force to figure it out. Okay. But to take that into consideration, then one has to say that Yoda's sole utility then would have been his ability to detect the future. What happens to just good old common sense? And again, this comes back to this ego. It's like they became so reliant on using the Force. They became so reliant on their own power as an order and as individuals that they stopped learning. They stopped trying. And instead, they were just resting on their own laurels. They were resting on this belief that they were too big to fail, to use a phrase that's, I guess, somewhat relevant. I don't know if it's completely relevant today's age, but go back a decade, too big to fail was a big thing. In the Jedi's mind, they were too big to fail. They were blinded to the level of corruption that was happening. There's a scene, now it's seen in both the book and in the movie, in Revenge of the Sith. The movie it's a really quick scene. It's a little bit longer in the book, but it's Obi-Wan, Yoda, and Mace Windu walking through the Jedi Temple, and they're talking about this suspicion that the suspicions of the corruption and the Sith's leverage or the Sith's power over the Senate. And when they were talking about it, there's an exchange that happens in the movie very quickly. In the book, it's a little more drawn out, where they're talking about the state of the current Jedi Order. And Yoda makes a comment that he's troubled by the amount of arrogance and ego that he sees in the Jedi. And then he even makes an offhanded comment about even some of the older, more powerful, more wiser Jedi. And it's kind of a backhanded remark towards Obi-Wan, because Obi-Wan he does have a lot of arrogance to him. Look at the famous line when he's like, Sith Lords are our speciality. That's straight up fucking cockiness. It's unwarranted cockiness too, because every time that Obi-Wan had fought a Sith Lord in the movies up to that point, he had gotten his ass beat, up to and including the fight in which he says that, which is against Count Dooku, and he gets his ass knocked out within the first 30 seconds of the fight. There is a ego that happened, and it's kind of born of privilege, if you will. This ego is born of this feeling that the Jedi know how they're viewed. They know that they're greater than most. They know they have access to the Force, which touches everything, and not everybody has access to the Force. They have access to information that not everybody has access to. So they become cocky. They start to buy into their own belief that they are better than everyone else. And this is problematic because, one, it blinds them to true corruption, but it also shows that they're not coming from this singular standpoint of, peace and protection and harmony. They're not. They're trying to perpetuate their order. There's another scene in the book of Revenge of the Sith, because the Revenge of the Sith book, I've talked about this in multiple episodes. It's an amazing book. If you haven't read it, read it. It's by Matthew Stover. It's the novelization of Revenge of the Sith, and it is fucking fantastic. It is amazing. In the book, there is a part where, so in the book, the corruption of Anakin takes longer and it's way more subtle. Like Palpatine's subtle twisting and manipulating of Anakin takes place over the entire book, and it's really subtle stuff. The movie's just real ham-fisted. But anyway, in one of the scenes where Palpatine's working on Anakin, he talks about that. He talks about how the Jedi have gained power, and basic political history shows that anyone who gains power becomes afraid to lose power. And he's like, don't you think the Jedi are that way? And it's true. The Jedi have, in fact, become that way. The Jedi may not be the militant arm of the Republic, but they have a seat with the leader of the Republic. So the galaxy's president, basically, they have, they view they are on equal footing. That's pretty egotistical, especially for an order that's supposed to be monastic. They have this power, this clout. They have their temple on Coruscant. I mean, let's talk for a second. Where the fuck is all the funding coming for them, for the Jedi? I know a lot about Star Wars, but I don't know dick about where the hell the Jedi Order gets their funding. I can't help but think of the Jedi Order and the Catholic Church. It's kind of hard not to draw parallels there. The Catholic Church is notorious. I mean, you do just a little bit of research. The Catholic Church has an incredible amount of wealth. I think there's something like the largest holder of real estate on the planet, like the largest singular holder of real estate on the planet. And they have, I mean, they have a lot of money, a lot of money. So, I mean, and then of course questions come like, oh, where do they get it? Do they get it from donations, this, that, and the other thing? I wonder the same fucking thing about the Jedi. Where do the Jedi get the money to build all these temples, to get all these starcraft, to fund, their operations? Where are they getting the money from? Follow the money. They are this big bloated organization, and they have power and they have clout, and they don't want to lose either of it. I mean, what do you think would happen if, let's say, well, let's take Palpatine out of the equation because we all know Palpatine was Sidious, but let's say Chancellor Valorum, the chancellor that was in place before Palpatine came to power, if he would have just suddenly said, all right, the High Council no longer has a seat at the table. They are not to be part of my council anymore. Like he's not going to heed their counsel. They're to go do their monastic thing. The galaxy, the Republic is just going to do their thing. The Jedi would have pushed against that. They would have said something along the lines of, oh, well, they need our counsel because we're wise. But boom, right there, ego. They think they know more than everyone else. They think they know better than everyone else. That is a problem, because now we're starting to see this is not this beautiful, light-filled, hippie-filled utopia that the Jedi like to pretend they are. They have essentially become like the Catholic Church. They now are the order itself has now become like an entity. It's a thing. It has power. It has influence. I mean, if it wants to wage war, it can. They're not the militant arm of the Republic, but when the Clone Wars start, Palpatine conscripts the Jedi, or asks the Jedi to act as generals to lead the ground troops. So again, I mean, that's basically like, let's just put this as a real world example. That's like the US decided to go to war, go into a world war, and decided to reach out to the Catholic Church and say, hey, all of your bishops need to act as generals. Well, what the fuck? Like, how does one relate to the other? But that's essentially what happens. They have become a large, I don't know what you would want to call them. They're now a political entity, even whether or not they want to be. They're used as a political tool by other politicians against other politicians, and they themselves, there's that whole conversation that Mace has with the other Jedi Masters once it's been revealed that Palpatine is the Sith Lord, and he realizes, oh shit, we need to take this guy out, but we're going to need to have to step in and stabilize the government until they can elect a new leader. That's a pretty bold statement. A monastic order that is supposed to be separate from the government of the Republic, of the galaxy. And now all of a sudden they're going to step in and take power because they believe they know best. That's some pretty sketchy shit. It's sketchy. I mean, at what point does the Jedi Order, at what point do they need to stand back and think, maybe as an order they've become too big? Maybe they need to cut down on their galaxy-wide presence. I mean, to them, they believe everything they do is the right thing. They believe going in and acting as a puritanical religious police is better for the galaxy as a whole, because they believe that their mission, that their code, that their beliefs are better than the rest of the world. So for them, it just makes more sense to step in and do these things. And yes, they are powerful. There's no doubt about that. They have a lot of power. They are able to step in and help in frontier worlds and help do, act as intermediaries when you have people that are disagreeing. It's not that they are without utility and usefulness, but they interpose themselves Okay, so I mean, I don't agree with slavery at all, but within the context of the Star Wars world, let's take a look at what happened with Anakin. So you have Qui-Gon Jinn, who's a space wizard. He's a Jedi. He comes and lands on a planet in the Outer Rim, Tatooine, which is run by the Hutt cartel. So basically, he has entered into a a planet that is not part of his government, that's run by a criminal organization on which slavery is legal. Slavery is legal on Tatooine. It's not illegal. But Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, well, we'll just talk about Qui-Gon because Obi-Wan stays on the ship. Qui-Gon lands, he comes into town, and he needs parts for his spaceship. So where does he go? He goes to Watto's junkyard. And Watto says, hey, I got that. And, Watto's a businessman, and he realizes he's got Qui-Gon by the short and curlies, and he decides to squeeze him for some money. In which case, Qui-Gon's like, oh, I've got Republic credits. Watto tells him, yeah, that's fine. We don't take that currency here. We want real money. We don't want your promise of galactic money. So if the Jedi are supposed to be these peaceful, neutral people, that should have been that. He could have bartered, he could have traded for it, he could have tried to do something in order to get the part that he needed. But instead, he decides to use the Jedi mind trick in an attempt to try to convince Watto to sell him it for this currency that he doesn't accept. That doesn't work. Toydarians are immune to mind tricks. So again, Qui-Gon's like, fuck, how am I going to do this? Well, then he meets Anakin, who is a slave. So at this point, Anakin is nothing but property of Watto's. He meets Anakin. He realizes there's something special about Anakin. He decides to take a gamble. When he bets on Anakin at the pod race, he once again cheats. Like he cheats. He puts his ship up for Anakin. And when Watto throws the chance die, Qui-Gon uses the Force to cheat. So he tries to cheat Watto in the beginning. That doesn't work. He then actively cheats during the chance die. So he manages to try to win Anakin's freedom. Anakin wins the race. Long story short, he's like, okay, I win Anakin. I want Shmi too, which is Anakin's mom. And Watto's like, no, you can get one. So what does Qui-Gon do? He just leaves Shmi Skywalker in slavery. He leaves her. Now, a couple of things to point out here on why this is ridiculous, and a great example of them acting as a religious police. This kind of comes upon everything we've talked about up until this point. This entire event highlights problems with the Jedi Order. So Qui-Gon, okay, fair. He didn't have any money. The agreement was just for Anakin. Okay, that's shitty, but okay. Like, it's not as if he doesn't have a fucking spaceship. He can't come back. So he takes Anakin, and Anakin says goodbye to Shmi, and they fly off together. And yes, some shit goes down almost immediately because there's the whole, well, no, because they fly and they go back to, they go to Coruscant after they get their ship fixed. So that's even before they go back to Naboo. There's no fucking reason that Qui-Gon couldn't have just got Watto's number as far as like, what's it going to cost to free Shmi? The Jedi obviously have a shit ton of credits. Get the money, get whatever it is that he needs, bring it to him, and free Shmi, because that's the right thing to do. But he doesn't. And it's not that he doesn't do it because, oh, well, some busy shit happened and then he went to Naboo and died. It's more than that. He didn't want Shmi out of slavery, because if he would have taken Shmi out of slavery, Anakin would have still had a relationship with her. Anakin was older. He was 9. He would have still maintained a relationship with Shmi while he was trying to do his training, because he would have started his training at a much older age, which is, as we talked about before, problematic for the Jedi because they don't want them to form attachments. But by leaving Shmi on this outer world or outer rim planet away from where Anakin's going to regularly be, they eliminate that. They take that distraction, if you will, out of the equation, and they leave her in slavery. They don't just leave her in slavery, but think about it. They leave her without her kid. Now, yes, Shmi was a good mom. She wants Anakin to go. She doesn't want him to go because she'll miss him, but she wants him to go because she knows that he's going to have a better life, not as a slave. But it blows my mind, even to this day, that, I mean, Obi-Wan could have went back. Anyone could have went back and freed Shmi. Obviously didn't take that much, because Lars, or not Lars, it was Lars Clegan or something. I can't remember. The person who eventually buys her from Watto and then frees her and marries her, he obviously didn't have to jump through many hoops to get her. They could have just bought her and then freed her, but they didn't. And they didn't do that because, again, in Qui-Gon's own brain, it's better for their purpose to have Anakin without Shmi. So it's ridiculous. And that's just one example of how they went across the galaxy all the time, acting as these religious police. I mean, again, I'm not advocating for, drug use, but the quick scene in Attack of the Clones where, the Death Sticks guy shows up and tries to sell Obi-Wan Death Sticks, and Obi-Wan mind tricks him. You don't want to sell me Death Sticks. You don't want to sell me. Okay, so yeah, obviously I'm guessing Death Sticks are probably on par with heroin, but he, without even a thought, just changed that particular dude's entire life without even a second thought. Just, you don't want to sell me Death Sticks, mind trick. And now the guy, you don't want to sell me Death Sticks. You want to go home and rethink your life. And the dude's got the most ridiculous name ever, because of course it's Star Wars. They named the character. It's like something Sleazebaggio. It's ridiculous. Sleazebag is in his name. But there's a whole little short story about how literally he goes home and his life totally changes. Like, that is a tremendous amount of power that these Jedi are wielding, and they're wielding it haphazardly. They're showing up at places, they're acting as diplomats, they're trying to, maintain in their mind what they think is peace and order. But at what cost? I mean, going around and doing the mind trick on people is ridiculous. They don't even actually necessarily have to use violence. Their very presence changes the dynamic because of what the order had become. Just saying a Jedi is involved adds a lot of pressure to a situation. That's not something that a peaceful monastic order should have. Well, as we all know, not all things last forever. And by the end of Revenge of the Sith, Order 66 is ordered, which is a hidden order it's basically brainwashed or programmed into the clones, that when the Supreme Chancellor orders or tells them to execute Order 66, it means that the Jedi have tried to overthrow the galaxy and they're to be wiped out. And Order 66 happens, and the vast majority, about 90, probably 95 to 99% of the Jedi Order is exterminated. They're killed by their own clones, they're hunted down by Inquisitors, and they are killed. And the Order is effectively destroyed. The last few pillars, if you will, of the Jedi Order, Obi-Wan Kenobi, Yoda, a few others, they all go into hiding, and they all go into deep, deep hiding because they know they're going to be hunted. Now, during the hunting, the hiding, and the surviving part, the Empire grows, and eventually I'll do an episode where we really kind of look at what it meant to be in the Empire, because the Empire, it was not this incredibly evil thing. Or let me put it was not this inherently evil thing. But the galaxy goes on, and essentially they forget about the Jedi. The Jedi were blamed for trying to take over the Republic. They were blamed for the scarring of Palpatine, and they are essentially wiped out of memory, to the point where, Luke has heard of the Jedi, but doesn't really know what they are. And by the time we get to the new trilogy and Rey and Finn are there, they think the Jedi are just like superstition and like fairy tales. So they're essentially wiped out as an order. They go into hiding, they go into surviving. Eventually, Luke, becomes a Jedi Knight, like my father. Sorry, there's a quote from the film. Eventually, Luke becomes a Jedi Knight and decides he's going to restart the Order after the events of the Return of the Jedi. Now, there's two different versions of that. There's the book version from the expanded universe, and then there's the cinematic version, which we still don't know a whole lot about because they're kind of exploring little bits and pieces of it in The Mandalorian. But we really don't have much, and they talk a little bit about it in the new trilogy, but we still don't have a whole lot of information on this new Jedi Order that Luke tries to start. But he does. He goes and he starts to rebuild his order. But here's where we're going to draw a lot of parallels at this point between the Jedi Order and large religious orders to begin with, because there's a lot to be discussed here. When Luke decides to rebuild the Order, at this point, the only real interaction he's had with Jedi is his brief time with Ben Kenobi, with Obi-Wan. And I say brief because he really wasn't with Ben very long before Ben sacrifices himself on the Death Star in order for Luke to escape. Now, he does commune with him and talk to Force Kenobi, but that dude just kind of shows up when he wants, as opposed to having like a direct one-to-one correlation. Now, he does spend a little bit of time on Dagobah with Yoda, but then he cuts his training short there in order to go rescue Leia and Han on Bespin, and gets into the whole fight with Vader and loses his hand. And by the time he goes back with Yoda, Yoda's, had enough of his shit and dies. So Luke never really got a whole lot of formal training. A lot of the training he got was communing with ghost versions of Obi-Wan and Yoda, or reading old books or scrolls or texts or, holovids. A lot of what he got was secondhand. Now, this is very, very, very indicative to modern religion. Now, I'm not trying to pick a fight with the religious community or anything, but large religions such as Christianity to this day, they are a lot like what would have been like, I don't know, the great, 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 great grandchildren of Luke Skywalker's Jedi Order. It's a religion, it's a modern day religion built upon translations of oral stories that were told. So who in the hell knows what was actually, if anything was actually said back in the day, what was actually said? Because all Luke had to build his new Jedi Order on were half completed lessons from two relatively newer Jedi, because Obi-Wan and Yoda were part of the new, like the more contemporary Jedi Order. Even they were operating on lessons from people from who actually started the Jedi Order. So Luke's reading texts that he may not understand. He's maybe inferring information that he does not get. He's making correlations that don't exist, and he's passing this on as the gospel, if you will, to his new Jedi Order. And that seems to be the case in both the film and in the book, because in the films, again, we don't know a whole lot about what he teaches at his academy, but we know that he was getting people, because that's how he gets Kylo, and then Kylo eventually burns the whole fucking place down and destroys it after Luke kind of had a moment of weakness and thought about killing him because he could sense the darkness growing in him. In the books, Luke goes about building his new Jedi Order by recruiting those who are Force sensitive. He doesn't have the weird baby taken. He doesn't go around recruiting babies or abducting babies. He goes around and finds people who are Force sensitive and has a real conversation with them and tries to build the order based around the people that are present. So, in the old Jedi Order, in the one that existed just before Order 66, Jedi were, I believe the word is forbidden to marry, but there were exceptions to it. So like Kieti Mundi, who was, he was a Jedi who was on the High Council. He had the kind of look like a cone head. He had very blue eyes and like a white wispy mustache. He was a cerulean, I believe is the name of his race. And the way that they procreate, he had to, for his race's sake, he had to be married. So like the order made an exception due to his racial situation. But for the most part, it was forbidden. In Luke's order, hell, Luke gets married in the books to Mara Jade. And, so marriage, he takes a lot more of a, I'm just working with what I got approach, which I actually think is probably a little better for how the order should have acted in the first place. The Jedi Order from like the High Republic, the Jedi Order from the Old Republic, the Jedi Order from the Republic that existed just before Order 66. Those Jedi were all part of a massive galaxy-wide organization. Luke's was this tiny little thing that was just cobbling together lessons and trying to be better. Again, I'm not saying that they were the best, but they were small and they were manageable, and they were, it made sense. But it's not as if Luke wasn't I mean, he still picked up a lot of those trends. And granted, he was just trying to make do because he never really had formal training. When he so spoiler alert if you haven't seen The Mandalorian, but in The Mandalorian season 2, what's Luke doing? Luke is tracking down Grogu so he can come and get him, so he can bring him to his academy. Again, it wasn't he was tracking down Grogu to be like, "Hey, what's up, buddy? Do you want to come with me?" He was tracking him down to take him. I mean, I don't know that they've officially confirmed it, but if you watch in the one episode where Boba Fett finally redons his armor, there is the scene where Din, the Mandalorian, takes Grogu to this stone and Grogu activates it. And in the distance, it appears, I mean, it's in the far distance, you have to look in the background, but it looks like there's clearly a figure that's talking with Grogu. And of course, everybody speculated on who it was before it was revealed that Luke was the one to come and save Grogu. But it's a pretty solid chance to say that was Luke communing with Grogu. And Grogu seems to, because of the age wise, he should know who, he should know who the Jedi are. I mean, clearly he was on the Jedi Temple because Ahsoka and Grogu were like, "Oh yeah, you were there. You were a youngling." Blah 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 blah. So Luke was just coming to take Grogu. I mean, even though Din was like basically Grogu's dad at that point, he was just coming to take him. What is it that Luke is teaching? Okay, let's switch over here to the movies. So Luke starts his Jedi Order. His Jedi Order gets wiped out because of Kylo. He turns into a grumpy ass hermit and decides to fly off to Octu and just be done with it because he basically got scared of the power he was wielding, which is kind of understandable in a sense. He got scared of what Kylo was becoming because he didn't want to recreate what happened to his dad, what happened to Anakin. But Luke built his order based on an interpretation of ancient texts to which he was probably not the best person to read them. Because I'm sure anyone who's ever read anything that's a higher level text, its understanding is often predicated on understanding other information that's not included in the book. It's like if you walk into the middle of the show Arrested Development, and you try to watch an episode right in the middle, chances are you're not really going to understand the nuance because that episode is going to have been built by every other episode that came before it. That's essentially what happened with Luke. He's grabbing books and is just extrapolating his meaning from it. And he's trying to create another galaxy-wide fucking powerhouse police force based on his interpretation of ancient texts. It's problematic. And it wouldn't be so bad if they just came out and admitted, like, hey, we're just doing our best. But they're not. They're very much the religious police. They're very much like modern day religion that's pushing this agenda and saying, if you don't get behind our interpretation of things, that you are less than. That's not what good does. That's not peace and justice and honor in the light side. That's religious persecution. And that's in a lot of ways kind of what is happening with the Jedi. And not that they are being persecuted, but they are the ones doing the persecution. And Luke is trying to rebuild this thing, because it's nice if you look at the legend. It's nice if you look at it's kind of like with historical sake, if you're a fan of the samurai. Well, the samurai have been incredibly romanticized in literature and movies and this and that you hear samurai and you think honor-bound noble warrior fighting for his noble lord. You don't realize that historically speaking, they were basically gangsters. That's what they were. They were punks. They for a large period of their time, they were privileged nobles, pompous asses, but they got romanticized to have this legend that's different than their reality. That's what happened with the Jedi. They have this legend about them. And what became problematic is they fell in love with their own legend. They became to believe that what people said about them. That's problematic when you have that kind of power. So the last thing I want to discuss, and this ties into The Last Jedi, is something that Kylo says in the movie, which is the age of the Jedi and the Sith needs to end. And I was so excited. It's probably one of the reasons I enjoy that movie as much as I did, is it looked like they were finally moving towards the gray path. They were finally moving towards the gray Jedi. This understanding that Jedi and Sith are, it's antiquated. It's just wrong. And it causes how much strife. how many us versus them situations do you need? The Sith are all about, embracing the dark side and destroying the Jedi. The Jedi are all about embracing the light side and destroying the Sith. But they're both followers of the same goddamn religion. They just have different viewpoints on it. And because of it, they're both dogmatic. They're both blind. They blindly follow their religion to the exclusion of everything else. And when Kylo says that, the need for the Jedi, the need for the Sith need to end, I 100% agreed. And I do 100% agree. If the Jedi and the Sith existed in the real world, I would believe that both were fanatical organizations, because they're both only utilizing half of what is there. The Sith reject the light side, the Jedi reject the dark side. But the reality is the Force is the Force. The Force is a spectrum. It is a full gambit. It is everything. It is not just the dark. It is not just the light, but it does not exist. The light would not exist without the dark. The dark would not exist without the light. It's important to understand that you can't hold these views where it's black or it's white. That's just not the way the world works. Now, it can be challenging. It can be problematic because sometimes you can get paralyzed by indecision. Well, if things aren't black and white, it gets exhausting trying to figure out the nuance and the gray and the subtleties. But that's important. That's the whole point of this 10-part series, is to understand that things aren't almost ever black or white. There's very little things in this world you're going to encounter that are straight black and white. There's always going to be the gray. And I really think as a human species, forget about nationalities or races or anything like that. As a species, I think we need to understand and embrace the fact that the gray is what defines us, not the black and white. I mean, American politics has become a complete mess because all that happens is the world is divided by these black and white views. You're left or you're right. You're with us or you're against us. And it's exhausting and it's tiring and it's not the way the world should be. It shouldn't. The world exists in the gray. Just because you can look at a spectrum and on one end you can see it's pure white and on the other side you can see it's pure dark, very little actually exists on the fringes. It's all in the middle. The Jedi are not these paragons of peace and good. They are just as problematic, if not more so, than the Sith. I mean, the Sith at least kept their numbers small. They had to. They could be individually more powerful, but they didn't have the kind of influence that the Jedi Order had. And the Jedi trying to be wise and this and that. How, they could have sat down and they could have tried to understand the dark side of the Force more, to understand the ways that it works versus the ways that it doesn't work. But they didn't. Instead, it was easier to just say dark side bad, light side good, without taking the time to look at their own actions or dig through their own legend to try to understand that they're no better than the Sith. They just did things slightly different. They still led to death and suffering and a perpetuation of the cycle. I mean, that's at the end of it, I think that's the biggest failure of the Jedi, is the perpetuation of the cycle. So that's all I have here for you today as far as the Jedi and the Sith are concerned. I hope you guys all enjoyed it. You got to see a little bit of my rage about the Jedi Order. So next week we've got Skynet. We're going to discuss. So Skynet, for those who are not familiar, is of course I'm using air quotes here, the villain of the Terminator franchise. It is the artificial intelligence that comes online and initiates Judgment Day. So, typically viewed as evil, it is the bane of mankind. We're going to come to the defense of Skynet, and we're going to discuss next week about how Skynet is not inherently evil at all. And in fact, humans may be the villains after all. So thank you guys very much for following along. If you haven't had a chance, please pop over to the Facebook, give it a like and a follow. Same with the Instagram and the YouTube page. We're just about ready to be wrapping up this series. We've got Skynet next week. We've got Wash from Firefly the week after, and then we're finishing it with Dolores Umbridge from Harry Potter, which I imagine will be my most challenging one. There's some pretty there's a lot of hate about that woman. Then I'm not too familiar with her yet, so I'm gonna have to do some research and watch some stuff. So as always, I'm your host, Tony B, and you all be safe out there.